Hi, everyone, and welcome to Civility at Work. I'm so glad that you're here with us today, and we have the most amazing guest, Christine Porath. Christine, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you.
I feel like that civility is, I can't stop thinking about civility, just the world that we're living in right now. Boy, do we need it. Certainly we need it in the workplace, but we need it in our communities as well. So I've actually been obsessing about you and your work
Oh,
because I've been thinking so much about how much civility is needed right now. So thank you again.
my pleasure. Yeah, no, I obviously the topic is near and dear to me as well. And unfortunately, like years ago, even I would say decades ago, I thought, oh, we can do better. And unfortunately, at least with the data, it shows that, we're getting worse, or there's more out there that we're encountering. And I think that there are a few big reasons for that, but it is not easy on people these days for sure. So I'm glad that you're at least aware of it. And I really appreciate you spreading the message and getting people to think about this, both in the workplace, but I would say even more broadly.
In your book, which I have here,
Thank you.
Mastering Civility, you actually mentioned, and this book came out 10 years ago, 2016. And in the book, you mentioned that civility had gotten worse. And I'm
Yes.
in that time frame. And
Yes.
I hate to ask this, but I'm guessing that it's gotten even worse since the time when your book came out.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're absolutely correct. And it's been trending up. So I continue to collect data and, started with the co-author about 25 years ago, Chris Pearson. We have a lot of that data in that Mastering Civility book. And then since then, tracing it and collected from thousands of people with Harvard Business Review, published that at the end of 2022. And at that point, 76% of people were saying that they had experienced it monthly, 78% were witnessing it. And we continue to see that, unfortunately, increase, both, I would say, in the workplace, but then that broadened things like people on the front lines and what were you experiencing as a customer and things like that. So it's unfortunately everywhere, but that trend has definitely increased over the last couple decades now. Typically, we focus on the workplace, but then we'll often broaden it out. And to no surprise, like you suggested, it's on the upswing.
So we need you more than ever. So again, thank you for being our guest. So I always ask our guests where they're coming from. So I'm assuming you're coming from Chapel Hill?
I actually am in California today, but
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you're on the West Coast with us. And
Yeah.
for our listeners, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat where you're coming from, nice to hear where you all are coming from. I'm actually in Portland, Oregon today. I've got a talk tomorrow down in Salem, Oregon. So I'm up in Oregon. And so our topic today, in case you didn't already get it, is just about civility. Civility is the glue that holds our society together. It is foundational for every organization. It is a leadership imperative. So we're going to be having a really practical conversation around what we can be doing, particularly in our workplaces, how we can empower, equip, inspire our leaders on all levels, particularly our managers. So,
Mhm.
Christine, you are the kickoff LinkedIn Live for the Million Managers Movement, which is an effort to get 1 million managers around the world to sign the pledge that they're going to be not only guardians of well-being, but
Yeah.
guardians of civility, which I
Fantastic.
think is, how can you have well-being without civility? I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. And it's funny, this came up recently, but like you needed also psychological safety, which I know that you've posted about and, gets a lot of attention. But that whole idea is it's really hard to have that. And that's such a wonderful focus. Amy Edmondson has done she's been such a pioneer in so many respects. But with that, and, given that you and I have even corresponded about that a little bit, is the idea is that it's really hard to have psychological safety where you get people's full contributions, they raise issues, it's really important for things like safety and creativity and performance. And I think unless you have civility or people feel a sense of respect, you're probably not going to get that. And so you're not going to get people will stop seeking help. sharing information, all of that. So anyway, I've appreciated you drawing attention to that topic as well. And I think the two are connected.
So Amy Edmondson was a guest of ours in the past, and AJ, perhaps you could share that link in the chat here. So I see we've got some listeners coming in from North Carolina here. So it's nice to see that North Carolina is represented. My hometown of Chapel Hill, or my home state, I should say, of North Carolina is, and your current home is well represented here. But in the conversation with Amy Edmondson, we talked about how one of the things that happens when there's low levels of psychological safety, and I think that civility goes hand in hand with this, is that people, when they feel like that they are the target of low psychological safety or incivility, they go into self-protection mode.
Yes.
And that's actually a huge energy drain. And I know that you open your book with sharing the story of a woman who talked about how she was the object of incivility. And I know you close your book with around what people can do. So let's start first with what that looks like, what incivility looks like, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your dad. And before we get into that, we will be doing a book draw at the end. This is for your another book of yours, which is Mastering Community. And I want to make sure that everybody, first and foremost, knows who Christine is. You're a professor at UNC Kenan-Flagler, author of 2 books, and then co-author of The Cost of Bad Behavior. So author of Mastering Civility and also Mastering Community. You've advised organizations like Google, UN, the World Health Organization, and your work appears regularly in the Harvard Business Review, along with New York Times, Wall Street Journal. And you are also a 2-sport Division I athlete, basketball and soccer. I love that.
Thank you.
The cost of incivility. Let's talk about that. And for our listeners, please put in the chat, I'm in, if you would like to be considered for the book raffle. So go ahead and talk with us about what incivility actually looks like, sharing a little bit about the story that seems to inspire a lot of your work around this, which is the story of your dad.
Sure. So just for starters, I think incivility is disrespect, rudeness, insensitivity. When a person doesn't feel valued, seen, heard, they might, say that they felt disrespect. I think one of the tricky things is it really is all in the eyes of the beholder. So it's a lot of different behaviors. Admittedly, it's subjective. It's how people feel they were treated. So someone else could say, I didn't mean to, you're too sensitive, any of those things. In my research, at least, and others as well, it doesn't matter. Like, if people feel that, you're going to get the consequences like drop in performance, 35% cognitively, creativity plummets, hijacks our attention. So it's really hard. One of the things that co-authors and I have found is working memory operates 18% slower. You don't pick up on different issues as well. So things like patient safety drop. You anchor in on things. It's hard to kind of factor in additional information. So it's hurt. People are 3 times less likely to be helpful, even if they're just a witness. So one of the things that I felt like you set me up for was it's not just if people experience it. Sadly, where we took the research very quickly was because most of my workplace experience was not at that age so much feeling it daily, but seeing it. And so and you mentioned, and I appreciate that, where the inspiration was drawn, and that was from my dad. And so we got a call. He was an otherwise healthy, vivacious guy who coached us for kids and sports and things like that. And we got a call. He had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance. And I remember vividly walking up to the hospital room when I was home from college one summer, and he had electrodes strapped to his bare chest. And what put him there was working for not 1, but 2 really toxic bosses over the course of a long time, years. And, he needed that job to kind of take care of us as a family. And so he put up with it. But at the time, I didn't know the particular incidents. It's only when I was actually writing the book where he shared some of the particulars. And what I realized pretty quickly, because just a couple of years later, I scored what I thought was my dream job. And I saw firsthand, sports management and marketing, pretty intense environment. And I would hear people say, like, are you an idiot? That's not what I wanted. Or, if I wanted your opinion, I'd ask. And again, I wasn't necessarily the target, but it was totally taking me off track because I was very naive. I came from, a really wonderful family, great schools, wonderful coaches. And so, yes, it happened on the sidelines and it happened in different places, but I just assumed that the workplace was very professional and this kind of behavior didn't exist, or that people would know it's not how you treat someone, or they're not going to work hard for you. They might quit. All the consequences that we now know matter and are attached to what I would suggest are even very small moments or touch points through the day that affect people very deeply. And that's, I guess, one of my other big learnings is when Chris Pearson and I actually collected this initial data this was business school alumni working in any different industry, asked them one time that they felt treated disrespectfully, insensitively, rudely. They wrote about it, and then they answered questions about how they responded or what happened to them. And unfortunately, people hold on to some of these things for not just the day or the month or the year, but often long periods. And so you're losing people's performance, 12% quit, all of these things that really affect the bottom line. So I'm happy to talk about any of the consequences in more depth, but I would just, painting broad strokes, this matters a lot, but I would say, there's a multiplier effect. Like, rudeness is contagious. Colleagues, good friends, and I have research that shows that in different ways. I think one of the things I don't want to forget to say, because it's positive, so I don't want to be doom and gloom here, is that civility spreads too. So, we can be a beacon for the kind of behavior, treatment, respect that we so desperately want, I think, today.
Yeah, I love that you cited Christakis's work around the social contagion effect, that we really can be the change when we exhibit civility, that it really does create a multiplier effect. One of the things that I've been starting to do is, in thinking about kind of where we are as a society, and is to start to make eye contact with people that I pass by on the sidewalk. And particularly doing that with people who I think are like with, women who are older, for example, who I think, as we age, it's like we become invisible. But, making eye contact and smiling, and it is unbelievable what a difference that makes. And you can see people's faces really light up when they see that they're seen like that. But I want to tie that to, you quoted George Washington's first rule of civility. And every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. So it's interesting to me that our first president operated by these rules of civility. And so one could make the case that civility really is the foundation of our democracy. But in your view, what's happening today?
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, I love George Washington's work and that quote in particular. And I think the whole idea is that we want to be able to disagree, about anything, whether it's politics, whether it's how a project should be done, whether it's, whatever the case may be, but doing it with humanity and dignity. And so we can, and Adam Grant writes about this really well, the whole like thinking again and being able to agree, and not necessarily agree quickly, but like have a conversation, even if we're coming from two very different perspectives. One of the things that helps with that, we know from research, is actually you focus in on one thing that we have in common. So for you and I, like as we were starting up, you were mentioning you were a college athlete. Okay, we run with that. Or, we're both parents, or we're both the idea of whether we both share a common team and interest. So you could connect with people on any different level, but trying to hone in on something and that often helps. Like if we're very opposed, let's say, whether it's politically, ideology wise, religion wise, what have you, but we're able to embrace that. And I think it's just, unfortunately, we've gotten away from a lot of the things that George Washington, that quote, and just, the way that we're living our lives. And I think, to your point about leaders, whether of the country or businesses or schools, what have you. And it's interesting because we have some school data now showing like the principal effect on violence. And so if a principal is rude, it ripples down, and we see it in terms of aggression with children, believe it or not. And so the idea being this stuff matters a lot, and leaders, for better or worse, are a focus, and they are a role model for us. And we know that from lots of different streams of research. And so it's really important that, like, let's just say in an organization, if you slap a value on the wall that says respect is a big thing for us, then ideally your top leaders are buying into that. And, I know we talked about Doug Conant, but that was so important. That was something that he did at Campbell's when he was turning things around. He expected, he knew that he had to, walk the talk, so to speak. And he was going to slip up, and he could admit that and then kind of handle that in the moment. But he expected his top leaders to, and that funneled down like a lot of leaders, mid-level leaders, because as you mentioned, there's very much a contagion effect. And so I would just say we all are leaders in some way or other. So if we can, again, hold on to that and think, I love how you gave the example of on the streets and stuff, because I think one of the messages I would love people to hold is an empowering one, which is control what you can control. Like, who do you want to be? And try to take advantage of those moments throughout your day.
So first of all, I love that you asked that question, who do you want to be, over and over again? Who do you want to be? And it's such a good way for each of us to live and to really think about our influence within our impact within our sphere of influence. But I want to talk a little bit more about Doug Conant. And you talked about him in your TED Talk in particular, and you shared about how when he first came in, Campbell was seen, one of the most toxic organizations that a Gallup researcher had ever seen. And talk a little bit about what is it that first and foremost he committed to doing, and then secondly, what did he do in order to turn around the culture, and in turning around the culture, turn around the performance of the company?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, like they were not doing well. I would say he had less data about toxicity, more about lack of engagement. So the Gallup manager had said least engaged organization that there is. They had just laid off a lot of people. It was just really struggling. Sales had dropped, market decline, all of that. And so he walked in, and he did notice his first day, it looked like a minimum security prison. Like there were, the guardrails around kind of the barbed wire fencing inside. It had that feel. And so anyway, he came in day one, and in a town hall, he mentioned that, he was going to be tough on standards. Like they had to construct a turnaround. They couldn't keep this up and survive. And yet the idea was he was going to be tenderhearted with people. And while he didn't say that per se on the first day, that was his attitude, and he needed leaders walking the talk. And Campbell's had a promise, which was basically like they would treat employees, and employees in turn were supposed to have trust and respect and these ideas. And I think one of the important things by setting the stage and expectations for this kind of thing, one of the things he did so well was he managed this in his leadership day to day. So he has a great book called Touch Points, and the idea being that whether he was in the hallway, in a meeting, in the cafeteria, that it was about that idea of engaging with someone and, trying to leverage his leadership expertise. He would often end with, how can I help? But the idea being it was respect in motion. And one of the beautiful things that he did while CEO is he hand wrote over 30,000 thank you notes, and to people of all different, a friend of mine heard of one incident a couple of years ago of someone talking about this sitting in front of her on the plane. Like he said, oh, I was this lowly salesperson and the CEO wrote me a thank you note. And he was bragging about working for Campbell's, 20 years later or something. And so I think like we don't know how much these touch points matter to people. And Doug, we've written a short HBR on this. So, I want to make sure I credit his work and philosophy on this. But at the crux of it, if you want better engagement, better performance, people to follow you and really lock in, then a great way to do it is to start with his idea, like the Campbell's promise, and that being a part of respect for one another. And I think he was someone that to this day, embodies that and, speaks about that. But I love the idea of touch points. If we hold on to that as people, and your sidewalk example is a great one. And then, one of the things that stuck with me is tough-minded on standards, tender-hearted with people. And I think that ties to like Kim Scott's radical candor too, or compassionate candor. So if we have that in mind, I think one important thing is civility is not just fluffy or being nice or what have you. We want both, but to get the psychological safety or to get some of the tough-minded ideas across, it really helps if you start with respect.
Of course, I want to welcome everyone's questions and comments. Please feel free to ask those. And let's talk. Thank you so much for sharing that story of Doug Honan. And in fact, I had a conversation with someone, and it turned out that she had worked at Campbell's. And I said, oh my gosh, I hear that that Doug had written these thank you cards. That's so amazing. And she said, I actually received 2 of those when I worked there, and they are framed and they are hanging on my wall.
I love that. Yeah.
So it just, to your point, these little things can really make a big difference. And one of the things that you really emphasized in your book is that it's not so much what you do, it's how you do it, the tone of voice that you use, or how you engage in those daily touch points, and really repositioning those daily touch points as an opportunity to lift people up as opposed to push people down. And again, back to your question, who do you want to be in every single moment? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I love that question. I mean, I think if you're able to do that, like literally if you come across something where someone's trolling you on the internet, or, you get an email from a colleague or boss or what have you, and you're thinking, gosh, do they realize how they're coming across? Then like that, who do you want to be? To me, it gives you that pause between like the trigger and the response. But maybe more importantly, or as important, it's really about your identity. So it's not about like, what am I going to say back to you? It's really about like, who am I as a person and who do I want to be? And we know that like, that's a test of character, and especially when you're stressed, or especially when you feel mistreated, how are you going to respond? And then I think the other nice thing about it is I believe it focuses on impact, like what impact you want to have. And again, you may have to depersonalize it from someone who has a pattern of this or what have you. But I think coming back to, it gives you a moment, but, it's about your identity and who you are choosing to be, and who you want to be, your best, your best self. And then the second thing is the impact that you want to have. And again, I would encourage us to think not just on that person, but, society or globally, or what ripple effects do we want to start? What contagion are we feeding?
So the culture that people experience by and large when they're at work is the culture that they experience within the team. So this is why those managers, those team leaders are really so uniquely positioned to be the ones who arguably matter the most. I mean, tying it back to the story of your dad, it was 2 toxic bosses, 2 direct team managers, team leaders who had this kind of negative impact on him through long-term incivility. So I'm wondering, particularly in keeping with this idea of empowering 1 million managers to really start to make a difference in the well-being of the people that they lead, what would you say are, say, 3 things that every manager could do to elevate civility within their team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of our touch points through the day, and that could be smiling, that could be acknowledging people, asking how they're doing, or, they say a powerful leadership question is like, what do you think? So I would say, like, starting with being mindful of our touch points, the idea of how costly civility is, like holding on to that as far as, thinking about how we're treating one another. And I would encourage us to become more self-aware, like that's a huge topic that's also tied to this. And I would love people to check out good friend Tasha Urich's work or TED Talk or book Insight on that, but like gathering data, because again, I don't think that this necessarily is about bad people always doing bad things. It's rather, number one reason for incivility is stress. So like the idea or picking up on negative emotions. So what do we need to do ourselves to hone in on our blind spots? And as a leader, that's going to be so important. Like if you can just tweak one thing about how you're perceived, it might be something where, you're interrupting, or your people aren't feeling like you're paying attention. You're always on your phone. Well, a lot of people do that nowadays, but like having that data, we can hopefully retrain ourselves. So I would just say, those few things to keep in mind might be helpful.
So more self-awareness, more knowledge around the impact of incivility, especially if those acts of incivility are coming from you, and you personally may not see it as being incivil. Things like interrupting. My husband does that a lot. It drives me crazy. And it's like, he's like, but I need to get this point across. And it's like, it doesn't matter. It drives me crazy when you interrupt me. But also, or interrupting the flow by looking, picking up your phone, looking at your phone, asking good questions. I love that. And then also really thinking about the impact of those daily touch points. So I think that's actually a nice segue to start to wrap us up here. And what are the top 3 takeaways that you would like our listeners to come away with in terms of this conversation about civility in the workplace and what we can each do to elevate it? And fine to repeat any of the things that you've shared already.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is, holding on to how important civility and respect is. Like I didn't mention this, but from our data, the biggest thing, Tony Schwartz and I had data from 20,000 people, and the biggest thing that affects the range of leader behavior, how I feel about my leader, is actually respect. Like people desperately want to feel respected. So how powerful respect is, you connected it with psychological safety. I would say how costly incivility is. So these, again, touch points, or how we're perceived, whether it's fair or not, how we're perceived is affecting people in their work, and whether they're going to follow you, and whether they may quit as a result of working with you. And then the third thing, I guess, would be this: who do you want to be, and getting data on that, that connecting it to self-awareness. So some important repeats, but those are, big themes, I think, from the streams of research that I believe anyone could do and have in their minds to come across better, to, kind of start spreading the behaviors that we so desperately want to see in the work and outside of the workplace.
So I wanted to do our draw really quickly, and also reiterate the 3 amazing books that you have. So Mastering Civility, Mastering Community, and then the book that you co-authored, The Cost of Bad Behavior. And Christine, can you share with us how people can follow your work?
Yeah. So right now, I think LinkedIn is probably best bet. And then any of the books, and I'll post there. I post occasionally to other places, but that's probably the best bet right now.
Okay. And so, Noah, you are the winner. Congratulations. So we'll be getting that out to you, Noah. So Thank you all for joining us today for this amazing conversation with Christine today. Our next guest in March will be Laura Schmidt, who runs a lab at UCSF that investigates the societal root causes of chronic disease in our current food system. So something that we need to be talking about as well. Christine, I want to thank you so much for elevating this really important conversation around civility, around community, the cost of bad behavior. All of those things are things that we need to be talking about more broadly, but also within our workplaces and particularly within our teams. And if you are a manager out there, please think about how you can elevate more civility within your team. I encourage you to sign the pledge. And we will look forward to seeing all of you next month. Christine, thank you again.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for getting this topic out there. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks again. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.